The fog hung low that night, swallowing the streetlights until they looked like distant stars drowning in mist. The road was quiet except for the soft sound of his footsteps as he walked slowly, with his coat pulled close against the chill he had chosen this path out of habit, not because it was the quickest, but because it gave him silence after a long day. Yet silence was not what he found when his eyes caught the sight of her. She sat on a weathered wooden bench under the glow of a flickering lamp, her hair falling in tangled waves across her face, her body wrapped in a dress of midnight blue sequins that once promised glamour, but now reflected only cold loneliness. Her bare feet rested on the ground, toes curled against the freezing air, her shoulders shook in small trembling waves. She seemed like a figure carved out of sorrow, left behind by a world that had kept moving. He paused at first, unsure whether to approach, but something inside him, a voice deeper than reason, pushed him forward as though fate had placed her here and him at this exact moment. His breath clouded in the icy air as he stepped closer, lowering his tone when he spoke. "Are you all right?" She lifted her head slowly, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion, her lips parting without sound for a long moment. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I have nowhere to go." The words slipped out as if they had been trapped inside her for too long, and now fell heavy between them. He felt his chest tighten with something he could not name. He crouched down beside the bench, ignoring the damp concrete that pressed cold into his knees. "I am not here to hurt you," he said softly. "You do not need to be afraid." She flinched when he reached for his coat, but he only draped it across her shoulders, gently letting the warmth cover her fragile frame. Her breathing steadied a little, though her eyes still carried suspicion, as if she had heard too many promises in the past. They sat in silence, the fog wrapping around them, like a curtain shutting out the rest of the city. Her fingers gripped the coat as though she wanted to believe it was safety, though her body still leaned inward as if to protect herself. She finally asked in a hoarse voice, "Why did you stop for me?" "Because you looked like you were fading," he said. "Because someone needed to stop." Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Instead, she gave a bitter smile, faint and fleeting. "Do you know what it feels like to dance for men who never see you as human?" The question cut through him and left him without an answer. He did not know, but he could feel the weight behind her words, the years of nights where lights and music and painted smiles hid the truth of her emptiness. She went on each word, trembling yet unstoppable. "I danced because I had no choice. The music played, I smiled. They clapped, they paid, but none of them saw me. They saw a body, a costume, a fantasy. Never me." He listened without interrupting, sensing that silence was the only gift he could offer her in this moment. She pulled her knees close, wrapping her arms tightly around them like she could hold herself together with sheer willpower. "Sometimes I thought, if one person looked into my eyes long enough, they would see the girl I was before the stage, before the smoke, before the hands that left bruises, but no one ever did until I ran." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she turned her face away as if ashamed of her own desperation. But he shook his head softly. "Do not be ashamed for running. It means you wanted to live." Her body stilled at that, as if no one had ever told her survival was strength rather than weakness. Hours passed like this, her voice breaking open piece by piece. The story she had hidden for so long. She told him about her childhood, a father whose anger came in bottles, a mother too exhausted to notice the girl slipping away. She told him about hunger, about nights sleeping on floors, about how the first man who offered her a stage also offered chains disguised as opportunity. She was barely 16 when she first stepped into the world of flashing lights and pounding music, and she never stepped out again until now. He listened to every word, not as a savior, but as a witness. He let her grief pour out like water long dammed up. He saw the scars in her eyes, the way her body curled defensively, even when no one touched her, the way her voice carried both shame and defiance. She had been broken, and yet she was unbroken enough to still run, unbroken enough to sit here in the night with hope flickering like the dying lamp above. The city around them stirred faintly as dawn approached, but in their corner time seemed suspended. She leaned back against the bench, her head tilted toward him, eyes searching for something she could not name. "Why did you stop?" she asked again. Not once but twice, this time louder, as though testing him. He met her gaze, steady, "Because you are not invisible." Her lips parted, but no words came, only a silence heavy with disbelief. Slowly she let out a breath, and her shoulders softened for the first time since he had seen her. When the first pale rays of dawn broke through the mist, she looked exhausted, her eyelids heavy. Her voice reduced to whispers. "I cannot go back," she said. "I would rather sleep on the street than go back." He nodded and stood, offering his hand. "Come with me, not to the past, but to somewhere safe." She hesitated, staring at his hand as though it were a bridge, too fragile to cross. But finally she placed her trembling fingers into his and rose to her feet. The coat slid around her frame as she walked barefoot beside him. Together, they moved through the awakening city unnoticed by the rush of people beginning, their day two figures bound by a night that had changed them both. He brought her to a shelter, a place where women who had fled the same shadows could find food, warmth, and protection. She stepped inside cautiously, eyes darting as if ready to run again. But when she saw other women, their faces carrying the same tired scars, something inside her relaxed. She realized she was not alone anymore. He did not leave her there. Instead, he returned day after day, sometimes bringing food, sometimes only silence, sometimes sitting with her for hours as she spoke about memories too sharp to hold alone. She began to rebuild herself piece by piece, learning to trust, learning to breathe without fear, learning to smile without it being a mask. In time, she found a way to dance again, not under neon lights, not for the hunger of strangers, but for herself. She taught young girls at the shelter how to move their bodies freely, how to turn pain into rhythm, how to let music heal instead of destroy. She discovered joy in seeing them laugh. She discovered her own worth reflected in their eyes. And he too was changed. He had gone out that night as an ordinary man, but came back with eyes open to a truth he had ignored for years, that suffering often hides in plain sight behind painted smiles and sparkling clothes. He learned that kindness is not a grand rescue, but the simple act of sitting beside someone unseen. Their bond deepened, not from pity, but from recognition. He saw her not as broken, but as surviving. She saw him not as a rescuer, but as a witness. They became mirrors of each other, strength and vulnerability interwoven like threads in a single cloth. One evening, months later, they sat again on the same bench under the same lamp. Now repaired and steady, she wore a simple sweater, not sequins and shoes. Instead of bare feet, she smiled quietly at him and said, "Do you remember when I asked why you stopped?" He nodded and she whispered, "I think I finally know the answer, because you were meant to." And in that moment he understood that fate is not always thunderous. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is simply two paths crossing on a cold, foggy night when one life is unraveling and another is ready to listen. The night he found her was the night he discovered that the most broken souls carry the brightest light, and sometimes choosing to stop for a stranger changes not one life, but two forever.